Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is Susan Corbett, a custom machine quilter, and I have for you today a delightful quilt that calls for simple custom, light custom, quick custom. Okay, maybe it wasn't quick, but it was a lot quicker. This is a memorial quilt. It's not a show quilt. It will not get heavy use. It's a presentation piece. So, and it's great big quilt. So nothing too fancy, nothing time consuming. Although by virtue of it being so large, any large quilt will be time consuming. So, you can already see here that I'm not starting out with the usual ditch quilting. That would take up a lot of time and effort. So to get this stabilized, two things are happening. Continuous curve. This lets me speed around the blocks in a really quick way. And then outlining the embroidery right up against the edge, which went pretty quick on this quilt. And I was only outlining the embroidery, not doing any dense background quilting. Not doing very much quilting on the embroidery itself. These pieces are extremely dense and kind of small. So I went in there and did a few little things, but mainly outlining was what it needed. I have used two different kinds of threads to quilt this quilt. A white to match the background. And the white I've used is, I believe, Omni by Superior, which is a polyester thread. It's good and strong. I think the less quilting you put in a quilt, the stronger your thread needs to be. The dense background quilting, that's where you want your little spindly, light, skinny threads that will pile on. That's not what's happening on this quilt. So the white thread for openers, and I'm quilting everything I can in white first, and then I'm switching to a gold thread. And that's where I chose a shiny polyester, not metallic, although that could have been good as well. But that kind of creates problems. It's a more challenging thread to use, and it wasn't going to show up that much. So, okay, so all that part will come later. Right now, I'm just dealing with the white. This outline quilting is probably the slowest part of quilting this. The most time consuming or painstaking. All the rest of it, all the designs I chose specifically because I thought they would go pretty darn quickly. I am accustomed to doing pretty heavy quilting, so this design scheme was a bit of a challenge because all of the quilting on here looks really sparse to me. But it's fine. It'll be just great. So the only ditch quilting in here is between the borders and the body of the quilt and in between the two borders. And I did it piecemeal as I was going along. Usually I like to do all the ditch quilting first, but there was so little of it here that approach just didn't really apply very much. So, and these blocks were really big. So I had to do a part of the block and then stop and scroll, back and forth to accommodate the whole breadth of the great big huge block. So once again, do some continuous curve and then outline. And so when you're looking for a really quick design scheme, I guess it's more of what does that leave out? Probably not a whole bunch of straight lines. Those require some effort and time and painstaking attention, math, rulers. If you're crossing over the applique, then you've got to get those to line up, possibly marking, so lines are pretty much out. Unless you can find some kind of free motion design that is sort of linear. But that's not what we ended up with here on this quilt. It's all curves, curves, curves. So it'll be continuous curve in the piecing, in the chain as well. And I thought, well, what's a way to get the background quilted without doing background quilting? By far, some of the fastest designs there are feathers. There's a lot of reasons why we like feathers, and speed is one of them. Once you've learned how to freehand a feather and learned all different types of feather designs, well, then you're just off to the races. So what I came up with here was, I thought, well, let's do a wreath around the embroidery to encircle and feature the embroidery. But all the blocks are different. I did not want a whole bunch of different circles to start the wreath off with. So I picked one size, and I'll talk more about how to get that to work here after a while. I want not the biggest feathers I can get my hands on, but not the most dense, feather that would use up a whole lot of thread or take all kinds of time and effort. So I've chosen a double feather. This is from a book. I learned this from Linda Taylor. This is one of her books called Fancy Feathers. It's her most basic feather book. It has all different kinds of feathers in it. And this double feather is a version of an open feather. A true open feather has no spine. The spine is invisible. All there is feather. And the feathers don't touch. There's space in between them, so there's no backtracking of any kind. They're lighter and more airy. And I thought this would be great for this quilt because it's a more sparse feather for one thing. And you can really do a lot with this one. So the game plan here is one feather is small, and then the next feather is longer. So small, big, small, big, small, big. And I put one line to suffice for the spine. Normally, I like to do two, so it resembles a vine. But there's no law that says you have to do that. And the beauty of having a single line spine is I can cross back and forth over it and over it as needed. And I wanted to be so versatile that I could fill in the larger spaces and then switch to the inside, which are smaller. So that helps get it done a lot more quickly. And it's not that hard to keep up with either. So in all the rest of the space that doesn't have feathers in it, I did like ribbon shapes and curls and tendrils, berries. I think in the end I added some holly, which is a predominant theme in this quilt, because that space does not need to be filled up necessarily, but it does need something in it. So you be the judge. Is this still too much quilting? Is the density appropriate? You know, that's one of the things I'm always thinking about. And also, do those feathers swamp the Cardinals? And I still can't make up my mind about that. I mean, I think they're on the verge of being too big. But you don't want little bitty teeny tiny ones either. On a great big huge block, you know, that wouldn't make any sense. Proportion. That is always a concern. How much is too much? And did I go overboard with the feathers inside of the spine? Are they cluttering the applique too much? I think I did okay. I don't know. As I say, I'm used to quilting a lot more densely than this, so it's, you know, this is where you just have to use your best judgment. I think it's really pretty. I think it turned out great. The client was very happy with it. I tried to use restraint. All right, so here's an example of a really different shape. The embroidery here is horizontal. And see, part of it doesn't fit inside of that circle. But that's okay. It doesn't have to. In fact, I think it's kind of artsy and cool for it to peek out. I don't think you're going to even notice it. And with a design as versatile as a feather, you can just take all kinds of liberties and hop over it as need be. Here's another example of a wide piece of embroidery that's going to peek out from the circle. So one of the things you can do, you can stop and start as needed, or I can always retrace my steps, re-quilt around the perimeter if it's only a little piece, to get over to the other side. Or I could do that one part and start the feathers until I get over to the other side and then finish the circle. Of course, I'm a lot more comfortable nailing that circle down beforehand. Whatever works. It helps to have a nice large collection of acrylic rulers, because, you just never know what size you're going to need. What size you're going to need is all different sizes. And it's tricky if you want to do a double line. Then you've got to have another size larger or smaller that's the preferred increment, or you'll end up with these huge stems. That's not good either. I don't know. Ruler work can get kind of tricky. for this one, keeping it simple helped a whole lot. Now here, okay, I'm trying not to do too much, but that little pocket of space right there was making me crazy. So I went ahead and quilted a little teeny flower, like in the embroidery. Just a little custom touch that would fill the space. I think that's really good and sweet. There were a whole lot of these blocks because it's a great big huge quilt. So it did take some time, but not nearly as much as it could have. And I think that's a really pretty block. Okay, so now we switch threads over to the gold, and here we can experience the zen of machine quilting. This doesn't require that much thought, and I've done continuous curves for years and years and years. As in Harriet Hargrave's wonderful book, she explains there is an order of things, and there are great strategies for getting around a quilt to get them done as expeditiously as possible. So with your chain, this presents a wonderful opportunity to just race around the quilt and get that quilted. See, in one long fluid motion, you can really cover some ground, as much as the piecing will allow. You could quilt each little square individually, but it's nice to have a pathway that lets you cover some ground in a smooth, graceful way. I tried to teach this to a bunch of rank beginners, and they balked. They thought that was just a horrible idea. So maybe it's not a beginner quilt idea, but once you get to know your way around a quilt, this is a whole lot of fun to see how much you can get quilted in one go without a bunch of stops and starts until your bobbin runs out. So what you want to do is leave a path. See, okay, at the bottom of each section, there's a line missing, but you'll go back and add that, on the second pass. Or if you're not dealing with a great big huge quilt, you can just go back in the other direction and pick up the unquilted parts, if your machine will let you quilt right to left without the thread breaking. And your chances of that are much greater here because you're not quilting in a straight line. The more the machine can go in all different directions, the greater your chances of quilting left to right without a bunch of breaks. This kind of continuous curve over a whole bunch of chain is just a lot of fun. And it gives you some instant gratification to get that whole section quilted relatively quickly without doing a whole lot of work. Okay, so once the chain was done, then I moved on to other areas where we're going to quilt with that gold thread. And that would be the borders. The outer border is a busy print, which is kind of a good thing because we're wanting to speed through the quilt and not have it take all day. So I can do some overall design in the border. And so here I've gone to one of my favorite overall borders, just arcs, just overall arcs. It's an arc meander. Because it's not going to show up that much. I mean, you can see it right here because we're up close to it. But you stand back a foot or two and that quilting is not going to show. Not near as much. So, okay, with any meander, what you want to do is vary the size of the design and go in all different directions. You don't want it to be static unless you want it to be static, and then you just as well pick, some kind of a formal fan pattern that was extremely repetitive. And that's not what's happening here. So it needs to go in all different directions. And this is fun. This is when you learn which way to go by doing. You just have to get in there and try it out and see what's going to work and what doesn't. But we're after contrast. I've done a few rows in this direction. Now it's time to go in some other direction. I've done some little sets of arcs that are tiny, so others need to be quite large. This also gets you into the zen of machine quilting. There's not all that much to think about. This is fun. It goes pretty quickly. The only problem, if you want to call it a problem, is when you run out of bobbin thread and you have to change that. But this is a really great way to speed around a border. This little meander also makes a wonderful background if you were doing it on a much smaller scale. This could also be used for a very narrow border, although it'll be much more of a pattern meander and not a true meander. A pattern meander marches in a line. A meander goes all over the place. And now onto the inner border. Same thread. See how there is a scroll pattern kind of sort of already in the print of the fabric? So I thought, okay, let's just do a curl. A curl isn't exactly a scroll, but it kind of accomplishes the same thing. And it's really fast. So the first row, you leave some room for the outside curl in, and then you're basically just echoing the curl shape in one direction and then the other direction. Really basic design, whole lot of fun. And when you need to turn the corner, I find that you just turn the corner. You can throw in a little a tiny leafy shape or a little tendril or something, whatever you need to fill the space, or not. And this is fun to do quite large and very, very small, depending on the size of the border. It works either way. Let's note here that I have not yet ditch quilted in between borders. I'm trying to think why that was. And you can see the difference. The left is different than the right. Here is a motif that I put in the corners and along the bottom. What is it? Well, it's a couple of cardinals. See, he's looking to the left. And I thought it was the cutest thing in the world and would fit right in with this quilt. But what I didn't consider was it's directional. The quilt is directional, and all the spaces that we're going to have to go in were going to be a strange fit. So you see what I've ended up with here in the corner. That's too much space around it to leave unquilted. So I've quilted the motif in the same gold thread that I used in a lot of other places, and I'm going to fill in with some white thread. I'm just going to do some holly, and we'll see if that will take care of it. I could put the holly leaves in first and then add some berries, or I could quilt some berries first and then add some holly. So let's try. And as usual, I like to vary the size. It looks more natural that way anyway. Holly is extremely forgiving. You can screw it up and it still looks just great. So that's a nice thing. I have quilted the Cardinals in the gold thread. The holly is in white thread because it's serving the function of a background design. You want a contrasting thread when you want the design to show up. I didn't use red thread because that would be garish. You want the focus to be on the embroidery, not out here on the quilting. So the gold is softer and much more subtle.
Well, there's room for a fourth. So and then I'll put the berries in wherever they will go. Okay, I'm liking how, because you know that's an odd shape. So the holly can be long and skinny or shorter, wider. So that fit the bill. It was an awkward space and now it kind of looks like it was meant to be there. And it's directionless, so that's even better. Okay, that was the bottom right corner. This is the upper right. So being a directional pattern, it left me with really different, see there were 3 areas over there in which to put some holly. Here I ended up with 4. What I like is that right in this section, there wasn't quite enough room for one more, so I made that one look like he's kind of underneath this one. I love it when that happens. I think that's pretty cool. Here is the machine, computer quilting, the Cardinal motif. You know, what I showed earlier were the corners. So those Cardinals are smaller. In this section, the motif is much larger. So this makes me a little bit uncomfortable because I think this is really sparse quilting. And that's just a personal preference kind of a thing. There's nothing wrong with just a little bit of quilting. It's a really pretty design. It's extremely contemporary, and this is what I'm finding with shopping for digital designs. There appear to be so much more that looks really modern. I don't mean mid-century modern, I mean modern day. So I'm going to be on the lookout for
some motifs that are appropriate for really traditional quilts. But this one, the mood of this design just kind of fit right in. And it is nice to be able to just tell the computer, make it this size. Or, you can rotate it and do a mirror image. And, there's all sorts of fun things that go with digital quilting, which I'm still getting used to. It's a pretty stylized design, which appeals to me, and probably to some other people. They wouldn't think, it's not as easily recognizable, but this is not the focus of the quilt. The embroidery panels tell the story much more than this design does, and that's okay. So this design went along the bottom of the quilt. It fit that space. In the sides, I found this other motif that I think looks pretty good. And so that is the ball game. It's a gorgeous quilt that went relatively quickly and did this beautiful top justice. Thanks for watching.